Today's topic is for anyone who wants to understand Jesus a little bit better. We're going to talk about 10 facts that prove the supremacy of Christ. And this is going to come from Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 through 23. In fact, Paul wrote this section to the church at Colossae to make sure that they understood what Jesus was really like, because they probably had some wrong ideas, just like many of us today have wrong ideas about what Jesus is really like. So we're going to do 10 things. We'll go real quick. The first thing is this: Jesus reveals the invisible God to us. Nobody knows what God looks like, and so Jesus shows us. Verse 15, Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. Now, we know that God is spirit, so this isn't saying that Jesus is some cheap copy of God, but rather it's saying that Jesus is God himself, and that in Jesus we see all of the characteristics of God at play. The second thing we learn is that Jesus rules over creation. Jesus isn't, God Jr. Jesus is actually sovereign over creation. It says that in the second part of verse 15. He existed before anything was created and is supreme over all creation. So Jesus is not a part of the creation. This is important for you to understand. Jesus is actually God himself. Jesus is supreme over creation. Third thing, everything was created through Jesus. When God spoke the world into existence, the Word was Jesus himself. Go back to John chapter 1 and you'll see that. And it says here in verse 16, for through Jesus, God created everything. The things that we can see and the things that we can't see, everything. The things in the spirit realm and also the things in the physical world. God created everything through Jesus himself. Number 4, everything was made for Jesus. This means that the goal of creation itself is to glorify Jesus. And you're part of the creation, so you were made to glorify and worship Jesus. Verse 16, everything was created through him and for him. And really, you should consider what this means in your own life. The purpose of your life is to glorify Jesus in everything that you do. Number 5, Jesus holds all of creation together right now. In other words, God is not like a watchmaker God who created the world and then walked away from it. But instead, like it says in verse 17, Jesus existed before anything else, and he holds all of creation together even now. That Jesus himself sustains the elements, that Jesus himself sustains creation actively right now. Number 6, Jesus is the head of the church. Your pastor isn't actually the head of the church, but Jesus is. It says in verse 18, Christ is the head of the church, which is his body. The church is made up of everyone in history and in every nation who has put their faith in Jesus Christ. And so if you are a part of the church, then Jesus is your head. That means you are dependent upon Jesus. So remember, he's the head of the church. Number 7, Jesus reigns over death itself. Jesus isn't afraid of death. It says in verse 18, the second half, he is the beginning, supreme over all who rise from the dead. Remember, Jesus went to the cross and died for us, and then he defeated death. He came and was resurrected 3 days later, and he was the first of many who will do that. Number 8, Jesus himself is fully God. He's not God Jr., he's not JV God, he's not sometimes God. Jesus is fully God. Verse 19, for God in all his fullness was pleased to live in Christ. I think Paul wanted to make sure that the Colossians understood this. And so today, even if you don't fully understand the idea of the Trinity, you need to understand that Jesus himself is fully God. Number 9, Jesus has the power to save you. In fact, this is what Jesus came to the earth to do. He came to save you and me. In verse 20, it says, and through Jesus, God reconciled everything to himself. And he made peace with everything in heaven and on earth by means of his blood on the cross. So Jesus has the power to save you. Jesus lived a perfect, sinless life. And because of that, anyone who puts their faith in Jesus is saved. Period. End of discussion. because Jesus has the power and authority to save you. But this last thing is perhaps the most humbling truth about Jesus, and it's that he has the desire to save you. He doesn't just have the power to do it, but he actually wants to do it. Paul says this in verse 21, this includes you who were once far away from God. Can you relate to that? You were his enemies, separated from him by your evil thoughts and actions. And yet, now he has reconciled you to himself. He has brought you into his own presence. Jesus could have gotten really mad at us. Jesus could have held our sin against us. Jesus could have held a grudge, but he didn't. He died for us so that if we would put our faith in him, we would be saved because he has the desire to save us. So those are the 10 facts that prove the supremacy of Jesus. I hope that gives you a clear picture of him now, and I hope it motivates you to pursue him with your whole heart.